You're listening to the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast presented by Kraus Health, the exclusive healthcare partner of Syracuse Athletics.
Well, welcome back to the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast, and today's going to be a fun one, folks. I've been looking forward to this ever since my very busy guest found a little time in his very busy schedule to join us. And our guest is Joe Tipton, national basketball reporter at On3. Joe, welcome to the podcast. And it's really good to see you and talk to you.
Yes, sir, Mike. Appreciate you having me. Excited.
Yeah, this would be great. Folks should know you and On3 as one of the leading sites in terms of national basketball recruiting. You guys do a tremendous job, and I wanted to bring you in because we're kind of getting near the end of the summer here. The Peach Jam recently wrapped up. The other big events with the other sneaker companies, they've had their events as well. So it seemed the time is right to ask you to join us and talk about some of the guys that Syracuse is really looking at in the 2025 recruiting class.
Absolutely, yes. Recruiting is heating up now. This is when I kind of come alive with July, and this early signing period will be approaching quickly.
This is Joe's time of year, folks. So, before we get into exactly who Syracuse is recruiting, let's start with a guy that they have successfully recruited. They have a commitment already in the 2025 class, and that's from Sadik White, a 6'8" forward out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We've already, watched this kid a lot, talked to him and talked to a few people about him, but what's your opinion of Sadik and what can Syracuse fans expect to see?
Yeah, Sadik is a super, super high upside player. He's ultra athletic, really long, really aggressive, plays really hard. I think he has, an elite defensive ability as well. The shot's still coming together, but once again, the upside's just through the roof. And I was talking to someone close with Sadik, and once before he made his commitment public to Syracuse, I was talking to this fellow, and they were saying, for us, it was never really a question where Sadik was going to end up. It was always going to be Syracuse. So he had plenty of options, plenty of other schools, but he knew pretty early on that he was going to go to Syracuse.
Well, and Syracuse really seemed to get in on him and really put a lot of emphasis on him early as well. And this is
Yeah.
kind of interesting because it's been a long time since Syracuse got a commitment from a kid out of the state of North Carolina.
Yes, absolutely. Made him a priority early and locked him in before this EYBL season, before he played in front of a bunch of college coaches. I think he would have been a harder guy to grab, but they were able to kind of lock in on him, like you said, zero in and get him committed.
What kind of impact can it help? Can it be with a program to get a commitment from a recruit as highly rated as Sadik is? To maybe kind of, be that first domino and gain, some momentum in recruiting. Is there such a thing as momentum in recruiting?
No, there definitely is. Definitely. Just with the fan base, the excitement, the optimism of landing a player of his caliber, but then also other players seeing it alike. When I talk to these high school kids and even, transfers, they talk about, what other players are coming in, and they know these other players. They're friends with these guys. They see them on the circuit. So they see a guy, like Sadik, and they see his status, and they say, well, I want to play with a guy like him. So it's very encouraging to see a guy like him already kind of bought in, and hopefully that creates, like you said, a little bit of a domino effect for other top recruits as well.
Sure. I get, and there's a lot of other reasons I guess a kid can help. And first of all, it's a classmate, somebody who can get on the phone in addition to the coaches
Yes.
and maybe talk to a peer, right?
Oh yeah, the players recruit each other. Definitely. Definitely.
Well, we'll see how it goes for Syracuse in terms of that. But okay, so with one recruit already signed, not signed, committed, let's move on. The name at the top of every Syracuse fans list when it comes to the 2025 class is a name that's familiar to us up here. It's Kiyan Anthony, the son of Carmelo Anthony. Syracuse has been in on this kid for a very long time for obvious reasons. I think they offered him a year and a half ago, back in November of 2022. Well, what's your analysis of Kiyan and his game?
Absolute elite scorer. Just a guy that can fill it up. Just put it, just a guy that is an extreme threat offensively. He's a guy that you have to have your best defender on, and he is not afraid to shoot it. He makes a lot of them, but he shoots a lot of them as well. So just a guy that could just go out and get you a bucket. I think he's still growing. I spoke to him at PGM. He's looking like he's about 6'5" now. Obviously needs to add some strength. Sometimes he can be a little shot heavy, but I think, with time, as players grow and develop, that, certain characteristics of their game change. But he's a player I'm very, very fond of.
You're right. He obviously is a scorer. He's one of the top scorers on the EYBL circuit. I know he had some amazing games at both the top 100 camp and also at Peach Jam.
Oh, yeah.
Where does he get his points? How does he score?
I mean, any way you want it, really. Off the catch, off the dribble. He can initiate the offense. He doesn't even have to pass the ball to get his shot off. You can run him off screens if you'd like. Maybe a little bit more effective that way with his feet set, getting those, open buckets. But he's a guy that you can put the ball in his hands and he can go get you one.
When it comes to a guy like Kiyan Anthony, he's got that Anthony name, right? So, I mean, when you walk in a gym, you know who he is. He's the son of Carmelo. As a guy who, puts together these rankings for classes, how hard do you have to make sure that you're appraising him, in a vacuum, minus that Anthony name? And this probably you had to do the same with LeBron's kids.
So I can't take credit for On3's rankings. So that's Jamie Shaw that handles all of that. So luckily, I don't have to make those hard decisions. But at On3, all of our rankings are geared toward NBA draft stock. So it's less about what they've accomplished as a player in high school, but mainly their ceiling and where we could see them being selected in the NBA draft. So it's all geared towards that.
And Jamie, I guess you have to make sure you're not ranking Kiyan either a little higher or a little lower because of that Carmelo factor, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think Kiyan's kind of made his own name for himself. Even he used to be kind of, that's Carmelo's kid, but now, I mean, he's a really, really talented player. He's definitely earned all the success that he's had up to this point.
Which schools are Syracuse's biggest competition for him?
It was interesting. Indiana was making a significant push up until recently. They've since kind of backed off. He's gotten a few new offers. USC and Coach Busselman. Ohio State is recruiting him now as well. Rutgers is a school that he says is recruiting him the hardest, interestingly enough, but they're very, very new. I know Syracuse fans don't want to hear that, but that's his words, not mine. And but I think at the end of the day, it'll be very interesting to see where he goes and visits and who, what schools, legitimately feel that they can be a threat. Just because Syracuse has been around so long and they've always kind of felt like the favorite to land him just for obvious reasons. And just kind of the way he speaks about the program. But we'll see who sets up visits with him. Auburn is another school that he's mentioned. They haven't offered yet. But plenty of schools. We'll see. Time will tell. Which programs are serious besides Syracuse.
Okay. All right. That will be interesting. Um, a kid that I really started to really focus in on back at the top 100 camp because he played really well there was this point guard out of the Baltimore, D.C. area, a Caden Lewis. What can you tell me about a Caden and as a player and also what's his recruitment look like?
Yeah, Caden he was always kind of a top 100 kid, a bona fide four-star, but ever since that top 100 camp and the first live EYBL session in Indianapolis, he kind of took off. I had seen him play before. I thought, he's a good player, but I watched him in Indianapolis and he really popped then. Just his ability to create. He can score it when he wants to. He's a lefty. He's got good size, and obviously with that, as I'm watching him, I'm like, oh, you have a pretty good recruitment. You visited Georgetown and Virginia and Florida State. Okay, great schools. And the next thing you know, every blue blood in the country's offered him a scholarship. So I think he's considering 8 schools. I think he
Yes.
plans to visit each of those 8 programs. I know he visited UConn, Kentucky, and North Carolina already. Syracuse is a school that's obviously expected to get a visit from him as well. Obviously, some stiff competition there, with just about everybody in the country going after him. But I think his recruitment could take a little bit longer just because he wants to go and see. He's in no rush to make a decision. I think he's got at least 6 or 7 visits kind of on the docket before he goes into commitment mode.
Yeah, a couple other schools I had jotted down that have offered him or that was on his list was Auburn, Tennessee, Duke. Hmm.
Yes.
It's like he took last year's AP top 10 and said, "Well, these look good."
Yeah, it helps. Every team needs a point guard, and he's one of the top floor generals in that class. So he's definitely a priority for those schools.
And he really did just have one game after great performance after another at that top 100 camp down in Orlando about a month ago.
Yes.
Um, so that's when I saw all these Kentuckys and North Carolina start coming in
Oh,
around
absolutely.
that time. He's not the only guard that Syracuse has been looking at. Tyler Jackson is another, and it's another guy. Syracuse goes right back to that DMV area there for Tyler, and he played on Team Mello with Kiyan. But I haven't really been able to get a real handle on his recruitment. What can you tell me about him?
Yeah, his recruitment has been really quiet as of late. Now, I'm not sure if that's he prefers to keep it that way. Him and his family prefer to keep it that way. But he did take a visit to Syracuse back in, I think it was January, an official visit. One of Kiyan's best friends, obviously, like you mentioned, plays with Team Mello as well. He visited Auburn as well. I'm not sure the extent as to how much Syracuse is involved
Hmm.
with him anymore. They could be, still recruiting him here and there, but I sure really don't feel like he's a priority for them. Just a lot of other guards in this class. Now that very well could change if a Caden Lewis decides to go to one of his 5 blue bloods, then maybe Tyler Jackson hops back on that board. So you never really know with recruiting, especially in this day and age. There's so many twists and turns. But I guess we'll just see what happens with Tyler there.
One kid that's already visited Syracuse recently, I think it was just before the Peach Jam, was Ryder Frost. And this is a kid who seems to be on the uptick here. I mean, and just a little while ago, it seemed like he was being recruited by some mid-major schools, some of the Massachusetts, Boston area schools. But now it's Iowa, it's Notre Dame, it's Wisconsin, and it's Syracuse.
Yes, he's shooting. That shows you how much value that shooting brings to the college level. He's just a guy that just a terrific shooter, can spread the floor. Not the most athletic guy in the world, but I mean, like I just said, shooting is incredibly valued at the college level. I know Harvard was a school that was really on him early,
Yeah.
but like you said, his recruitment just absolutely took off. Syracuse got him on an official visit, I believe, in June. So I would definitely say that they're a school for. I mean, he's definitely a player for Cuse fans to keep an eye on.
You recruit a kid just based on his fabulous name. I mean, seriously, can you get better than Ryder Frost?
An absolutely elite name.
Um, another wing, because Ryder Frost is about a 6'6", probably a shooting guard, more of a wing. But a wing out of Florida, Sean Abayev. And correct me if I'm not saying either one of those names right, but I think I got it. Sean Abayev from the Fort Lauderdale area. And I know this is a kid that Syracuse is definitely interested in.
Yes, yes. Another guy that can really fill it up, an elite shooter. Hopefully, I don't know if he's scheduled a visit to Syracuse or not. It could,
I haven't heard of a definitive date yet, but I wouldn't be surprised in the time between you and I are talking now,
yeah.
and I'm able to get this thing produced and published if we don't hear about one.
Yeah, no doubt. There'll be plenty of visits here in towards the end of August and then September and October. So I wouldn't be surprised if he sets one up during that time frame. But another really good prospect. I think he's visited Georgia. I think Arizona State's been in on him as well. Oregon, Tennessee was in there early as well. So some really other good schools. But I do think that Syracuse is definitely in the mix there.
Now, I described him as a wing. I've seen him listed at 6'7". What kind of player is he?
Yeah, kind of a guy that a really good spot shooter, but he can also create for himself. Kind of long, athletic, defends as well, plays hard. Like you said, good size. A lot of upside with him as a player.
Um, we're not going to get to every single player I think that's been linked to Syracuse, but just a couple other names I definitely want to ask you about. London Jemison. He's a 6'8" forward out of Connecticut, goes to St. Thomas More, one of those great prep schools in the New England area. And he was up here at Syracuse for a game this last season. So he's seen the school. What do you know about London?
Yeah, so he is a kind of a do-it-all forward. He can
Mhm.
shoot, dribble, pass. He's athletic. He can handle the ball when it needed to as well. He's got really good size, 6'6", 6'7", 6'8".
Mhm.
Syracuse just spoke to London recently. Syracuse does remain involved. They're definitely recruiting him. He's got visits upcoming to Alabama, Notre Dame, and he just scheduled Kansas and Louisville as well. But hopefully it helps that this is a guy, when he visited Syracuse back in, I think it was January or sometime earlier this year, people knew about him, but maybe just in, the northeastern part of the country. But nationally, this EYBL season during those live periods, that's when he kind of really popped on people's radar. So this is the guy that people are just kind of, at least colleges are just now kind of finding out about. So maybe that will help Syracuse knowing that, hey, they can say, hey, London, who was recruiting you a year before all these other guys hopped into your recruitment? So,
Coaches love to use that line when they can, right?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like we were here first or, early on.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we've loved you the longest.
Right.
Um, there's another kid whose name, and I don't even know if he was at Peace Jam or who he played for. I'll be honest here, he's a name that I've had on a list for a while, but I know so little about him. Asher Elson. And I don't even, I tried to send you a few list of names here so that you were somewhat prepared. And forgive me, Joe, if I even left this kid off of the list I sent you in an email. But 6'9" kid out of the Brooklyn area, right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit familiar with him. I'm kind of right up your alley as well. Kind of an under the radar player. Got an offer from Syracuse, I think sometime this spring or early this summer. Got a couple other schools involved with him as well. Georgia Tech's made an offer. Creighton, Illinois as well. But I'm not super familiar with him. He's a guy I
Yeah.
definitely need to do some research on. He's just kind of a late bloomer.
And that's the way it seems. And hey, that happens sometimes, especially with a big kid. But if you're 6'9" and any kind of athletic,
Yeah.
you're gonna get some attention. So that's an intriguing one. We'll have to kind of continue to see what happens. But the first three schools I had jotted down for him were St. John's, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. And I look at those three schools and I'm thinking, geez, I remember the recruiting battles between Luke Hornacek, Bobby Crimmins, and Jim Boeheim.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
These are the three. I mean, back in like the late '80s, early '90s, they went after everybody together.
And especially with a guy like him, with Asher, this is a down class for bigs.
Mm.
So if you can get an under the radar big, I mean, that's just as good as gold. There's not really many elite, high end big men in this class.
Just in general, Joe, this is basically year two of Adrian Autry as Syracuse's head coach. I know he just finished his first season, but this is the second summer he and his staff are out. Um, so over this past year or year and a half or whatever, can you kind of describe, what you've seen in terms of the Syracuse staff, their approach to recruiting, how they hit the road? Does there seem to be a strategy, a method to their recruiting?
Well, I think they obviously have their certain, target areas geographically, like we kind of talked about earlier, the DMV, but they're going after the top talent in the country. They want the elite of the elite, and they're not going to really shy away from that. Another guy or a guy we talked about earlier, Caden Lewis,
Mhm.
talked about every blue blood in the book, but they're still going to fight tooth and nail for a guy like him. Obviously, you already have Sadik White committed, so I think they're going to go after the premier prospects. They've shown that they can do it. Even the upcoming freshman or a rising freshman, Donnie Freeman, a top 10-ish guy. They got him early. I think when he committed, he might have not even been ranked anywhere near the top 10. He might have been closer to 50 or 40 when they got him committed. So they're kind of identifying those guys early, kind of as we went through on this podcast. And I think their player evaluations have been pretty accurate. They're kind of betting on the future and what those players can be, once they're on campus at Syracuse for a couple of years.
Do you have to recruit differently when your coach is a relatively new name out there, a guy like Adrian Autry, who's now has 1 year as a head coach versus, when you had Jim Boeheim, Hall of Famer?
No, I don't think so. You see guys like Pat Kelsey, who are brand new at Louisville, and most of these high-end recruits have never watched College of Charleston play, his former school, of course. And Louisville's the new shiny object. And I think it boils down to the brand. Syracuse's brand is, at the very top of college basketball, same with Louisville. And I think that definitely, helps recruits and kind of recruits itself in a way.
That's all interesting. That's really, really cool. Your story's interesting too, Joe. This wasn't exactly what you started doing. You started, well, explain to folks how exactly you sort of got into this business and this gig.
Yeah, so it really just started with me making edits on my phone. It wasn't even recruitment graphics that you see on my social media now, but it was just real basic stuff, putting filters on photos, maybe some Nike motivational quotes on photos. And I saw kind of an opportunity. These high school players didn't have anything to, post on their social media. This is when Instagram was just kind of starting to become a thing for these high school guys. So I was like, hey, I can make something for your top 5 schools or your commitment to fill in the blank program. And then that's kind of how Tipton Edits was born. And I've done it for about 8 years now. And then I graduated from college in 2021, and that's when I joined On3 and kind of parlayed the graphic design success into reporting, because it was a seamless transition, because I already had the news and now I can just report on the news. So it's been great joining On3 and just kind of the journey in general. I'm very, very fortunate to be able to do what I do, and definitely don't take it for granted.
Yeah, you really just kind of filled a void there that I think a lot of other people didn't even recognize was a void.
Yeah, I don't think because it kind of came out of nowhere. Like no one, it wasn't really a thing prior. And I kind of stumbled into it in a lot of ways as well. I was like, oh yeah, I can make these edits. Yeah, I can put them on Instagram and players can post them. I thought it was super cool and didn't think it was ever going to go anywhere, but luckily stuck with it. And, it definitely turned into something.
Where did you go to school, Joe?
The University of Alabama in Huntsville.
All right.
Yes,
There
sir.
you go. And that's where you're based now, or at
Correct.
least you still
Correct.
are in that area?
Still in Huntsville, yes.
Fantastic. For folks that don't know, that's the northern part of the state, right?
Correct. Correct.
As a guy who used to live and work in Nashville, Tennessee, I know exactly how to get to Huntsville. So
There you go. Yeah, we're not too far from Nashville at all.
there you go. Joe, this has been a pleasure and a lot of fun. I appreciate your insight into some of these recruits. And it's been fun for me to get a chance to actually talk to you. And so thank you for dropping in on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I enjoyed it. Have me back anytime. Enjoyed it.
We'll take you up on that. All right. That sounds good. Everybody, you heard him. He said he's coming back, and we'll get him back here. Maybe in the fall, maybe around some early signing period or something like that. So, Joe, again, thank you. For folks out there listening, thank you as well. And we'll see you next time on the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast.
Join us next time for the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast, presented by Crouse Health, the exclusive healthcare partner for Syracuse Athletics.